It's Final Friday.
We have time for one more follow today. I asked you for someone who makes the internet a better place, and you said Christi Steyn, who is on TikTok and Instagram at Christi.Steyn. Christi is spelled Christi, and her last name, Steyn, is spelled Steyn. Christi is a spoken word poet, which is not a type of person we hear about a lot on this podcast. So I love this. I want to hear about this. What do you like about Christi and about her poems specifically?
Yeah, I mean, Christi, I just find her poetry to be beautiful. It's gorgeous. I think her delivery in how she kind of reads her poems and presents them to her followers and to her audience feels really different from what I see everyone else kind of doing on the internet.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons I love her. And I find her work to just be heartfelt, emotional, deep, touching. And I've fallen down, rabbit holes where I've just watched so many of her videos and I'm like, wow, this is just beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And spoken word poetry as a medium, whether it's on the internet or even in person, I don't want to call it a dying art form, but I don't feel like there are many very super popular spoken word poets.
Yeah.
And so I just think it's beautiful. It feels to me sometimes that it harkens back to something simpler where I'm just going to deliver these powerful words to you. Rupi Kaur is another poet that I love. She has several books, but she does spoken word poetry during her book readings. And I also follow her on Instagram and love her work. But, Christi, I think she's sort of a lesser known poet than Rupi is and is up and coming. And that's why I wanted to, give her a shout out. Like Rupi Kaur really got me back into poetry and this idea of spoken word poetry. So I just definitely want to give her credence. But Christi's sort of another one who I think has less of a following and is up and coming. And I also just find wonderfully beautiful her words.
Yeah, I mean, you were saying earlier that, pre-pandemic, you were a big stand-up comedy fan, just going out to all these shows constantly, seeing new stand-up comics. And I feel like, spoken word poetry is, I assume in a big city like New York, there are venues where you can go and you can regularly find talented poets. But I also feel like, there's just not as much of a guaranteed future for live poetry as there is for comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are intimidated by the idea of poetry, or they're not as willing, I think, to show up and maybe pay up to see a poet who might challenge them, who might unsettle them, as they would be for someone who's going to make them laugh, give them an escape.
Yeah, even in New York, there are definitely venues to see spoken word poetry, but I feel like the shows I've, even pre-pandemic were fewer and far between because I just don't think it's a medium that lots of young people or artists who want to get famous on the internet consider for themselves. And also spoken word poetry is difficult. It's a difficult medium to consume. It's very thought heavy.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just here's a joke and here's the punchline.
Right.
It's really, you have to be very attentive in your listening. As somebody who likes podcasts, who works in podcasting, I like listening to things and hearing people talk very much. But yeah, I think as a medium, it's not as common as a medium. I'm hoping that spoken word poetry will become more popular, especially if you look at someone like Amanda Gorman, who was the inaugural youth poet for President Biden last year when he was inaugurated. And she read that beautiful poem and received such acclaim. I actually went out and bought her book after that because I so loved watching her deliver that poem. Maybe we're on the precipice of, a revival of spoken word poetry and sort of beatnik poets who are out there. I would love to go see people deliver beautiful messaging in sort of this creative and artistic way. So that's one of the reasons I follow Christi, because I'm just like, it feels like a breath of fresh air when I see her posts come across my feed.
Well, that's just what I was going to say, is that it feels like, if we are going to be on the precipice of a revival here, that it might happen more on Instagram and TikTok, right? Because, so in Christi's videos, when she's performing one of her poems, the words are fading in over her as she's talking. So you are both listening, and whether you have the sound on or not, you are seeing the poem as it unfolds. And I think that's maybe kind of a perfect on-ramp for someone who doesn't read or wouldn't attend necessarily a live poetry show, if they're able to get a poem that way. I feel like there's a lot of potential there for Christine, for other poets to connect with people who maybe never would have, experienced their work before.
Right. I completely agree. I think maybe somebody who would never sit down and read a book of poetry or, a blog or something like that with posts of poems would watch a video like something from Christi or something from Amanda Gorman or something from Rupi Kaur and share it and say, wow, isn't this beautiful? So yeah, I hope there is any of the spoken word poets out there listening, do your thing. I want more.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, before we wrap up, I wanted to edit in one of Christi's poems. Do you have a favorite that we should put in here?
Yeah. So this poem by Christi, I think it's called There's Nothing Wrong with You. And I really love this poem because one of the things she says in the poem is, I don't want to hate myself for not being happy. Some days are for sadness. And I think especially in our sort of very online world, in our world where, we always are kind of living our best life and like presenting ourselves in a way we're always happy, we're always thriving. I think there's something very real and honest about saying, like, sometimes, like, I am sad or, like, sometimes things are not going my way and I can still love my life and be happy even if that's the case. And I think she brings a real softness to that idea. And I just appreciate it. And I appreciate sort of the depth and complexity of, like, the idea that she's putting forward.
Beautifully said.
I am learning to love myself on unlovable days. I allow myself to go slow, choosing kindness instead of judgment. I won't hate myself for not being happy. Some days are full sadness, and when sadness comes, I expose my heart and ask her to talk. What can I do for you? You are safe here. You are safe here. I know how exhausting joy can seem. She will appear again soon without trying. There is nothing wrong with you. There is nothing wrong with you.
That was Christi Steyn, who is on TikTok and Instagram at Christi.Steyn.